Well, that was a long intro, but I liked it. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. This is your host, Ranger Met. I hope you like my new intro. I liked the previous one; it was great, but I thought it was time for an update. I hope you guys liked it. I'm going to update it as I go. I'm thrilled to have this guest on today. I know you guys who've been watching for the last 4 years have known for me to have a lot of book authors, like you saw in the intro, as well as soap stars on it the most. But today I thought let's go back into our childhoods, as 90s babies. I got a man on who was a great director on the show. He directed another show, Wishbone, I just found out about. But like many others, he directed a show that involved the purple dinosaur that sung I Love You. He did 360s in the air and had many kids on for a number of years from different ages. And if you've heard this theme, you know exactly who I'm talking about.
And remember, I love you.
That's right. It was Barney and Friends. Ladies and gentlemen, let me bring my boy on. This is Mr. Fred Holmes. Hey, Fred.
Hey, how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for being here today. I hope you liked the little intro I put together.
I love your intro. That's great. I noticed you had several scenes from Radio City Music Hall when they did the show there. I actually got to attend that one time, and that's a wonderful experience doing that, watching all these kids standing out in the aisles doing the Raindrop song going, seeing 2,500 kids doing that at the same time was a real treat.
Right. Yeah, I wish I could have been there, but I remember when it came on video, Toys R Us, it was popular at the time. They didn't have it. So I was disappointed when we went to get it. So my mother, they had to order it, and we went to get it. I just hugged the video so closely. And, it was something about watching that show. I mean, because Radio City, years later when I got older, I was like, this is a place where they had Oscars and the Grammys, and they had this show there that was big on PBS at the time. That was just like outstanding. It was something.
Yeah, it's an amazing venue. The first time I went, I was in New York doing press for a movie with Lou Diamond Phillips called Dakota for Miramax, and we decided to go visit. We were there around Christmas, so we went and saw their Christmas show.
Right.
And if you've never seen their Christmas spectacular, it really is spectacular.
Oh man, Fred, how did you get to want to be a director? Was that something you wanted to do growing up?
Actually, I wanted to be an actor, which you'll probably, if you talk to most directors, that most of them started out wanting to be actors. I did theater from the third grade through middle school. I'm sorry, through high school, and then when I had an opportunity to go off to college. My dad he said he would pay for college as long as I would major and do a pre-law degree and become a lawyer. And I did that about 6 months, Matt, and realized that was not the way I wanted to make a living. And I had a friend that was in the film business, actually was in the film department at the school. And he said, hey, he said, well, why don't you be a film major? He said, all we do is watch movies. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I had always loved movies growing up and TV shows, and watched a lot of TV and movies. And so I majored in film in college. And interesting enough, I was able to do 2 films under grants from PBS while I was in school. They actually gave me the money to make some films. So I'd actually worked for PBS long before I even began my career. So when I got out of school, I became an editor in TV commercials. And I did that for, about 3 years. And during the process of doing that, I received an opportunity to direct. So I started directing TV commercials. I did national television commercials for a bunch of companies. And during that whole process, I one time did a documentary. And I realized I really loved doing documentaries. So I actually left and started doing documentaries and was hired by companies. And so I spent a little over about 3.5 years traveling all over the world directing television documentaries. And I went, I don't know how many countries, and had a great time. But, you know, I picked up a strange disease in Honduras one time, and it was really sick. And then one time I was actually filming in Central Africa, and we were flying from a place from Kenya over Ugandan airspace into a place called Zaire, which is the Congo today. And as we were flying over, the Ugandan military told us that we either landed or they'd shoot us down. So we had to land. And so a few things like that happened where, you know, I've never seen a movie yet it was worth dying for. So I came back to the States and I looked around and thought, well, what could I do with myself? And I've always loved, you know, like you, I grew up watching TV and loved TV shows and stuff. And so I started writing. I wanted to direct TV shows and movies. So I didn't know how to break in. I didn't have any contacts or friends in Hollywood or anything. So I started writing spec screenplays. And spec screenplays are screenplays you just write for yourself, and then you send it off to film companies and hope they'll buy them. And if they buy them, then you say, hey, I'd like to direct. So I actually started doing that. And during that process, I received an opportunity to start directing some low-budget television shows in the Dallas area. And so I started doing that, and that led to another. And sure enough, I had a friend that was starting a TV show called Wishbone. And so they called me and said, would you direct our pilot episodes? So I got to go direct Wishbone and did a bunch of those until they got canceled. And then the same company that owned Wishbone also owned Barney and Friends. And so they asked me to come over and start directing Barney. And so I went over there and stayed 15 years, directed, I think I was told I directed 95 or 98 PBS episodes in like 30 something home videos, and had a wonderful time.
Wow. I gotta say, you sound just like me. I gotta tell you, I mean, listening to your story, because, you know, I mean, not to flip it around on me, but I was the same way growing up. You know, I love films. I was not, you know, I'm not into sports per se. You know, I know like football, but I wasn't in the, you know, joining sports, after school activities. I was a writer as a kid, watching daytime serials and other things. And like you, I went to college. I took a class in construction. It was my mother's idea, because I did a class in my last year of high school where I built this straw tower with a glue gun. She was like, pick a class in construction. No, I didn't like it. It was like, it wasn't really even a construction class. It was like a blueprint class where you read maps, and the teacher off the bat was like, no, this is not like the high school class. This is different. And it was just weird. And then I was like, okay, I passed it with a C, moving on. So I got into photography, which I love, and filmmaking. And I got into like in documentaries, like you said as well. There's a man at Disney that I interviewed named Don Hahn, who did a doc on Disney from the 80s and 90s, and one about a man named Howard Ashman. And watching all that, I was like, you know, maybe I need to get into making documentaries. And I just did two years ago, and I just did one about my town, Baltimore. So it's just hearing your story, I'm just like, dude, you're reminding me of me.
Well, you know, it's really strange how people, if you talk to different people, you ask them how they got into the business, and almost invariably, there's no straight path to doing it. You know, it's unfortunate that in the film business, there's no way for people to mentor you, or for you to have somebody who will help you along. Most directors are very territorial, and
Mm-hmm.
so they look at you as competition. So I couldn't get anybody to would give me a break or let me on their set or anything. But over time, then after a while, you start building relationships. And the thing that I found that has always worked best for me is building friendships. And
Right.
so what I would do is I'd go hang out on people's sets. Anytime anyone would let me on their set, I would go hang out on their set, and I'd go visit with the producer, because the producers generally hire the directors. So
Right.
I'd get to be friends with the producers, and I'd talk to the writers. And I mean, after a while, you start building up enough relationships to where people say, a project comes along, they say, hey, this Fred Holmes, he's not a bad director. Why don't you let him have a shot at it? So,
Right.
it's crazy how we all got there, but eventually, if you stay after it, my friend, you get there.
Right. You're exactly right. What stands out to you when you directed Wishbone? I mean, obviously, it was the show about the dog who had imaginary another world. He was Hunchback and Robin Hood, which that was one of my favorites. And then they went to the adult world with Joe and the other kids and Ellen, and like, I love that show. It was one of those great shows that I wish could have stayed a little longer.
It was unfortunate how that all came about. The people that, like I said, the company that owned Wishbone also owned Barney, and Barney came first, and so Barney was already in production when we started doing Wishbone.
Right.
And Barney had been a cash cow. I mean, that show was the license fee that PBS paid was only like $1 million for 23 episodes, which isn't a lot of money for television.
Right.
But it was generating like $350 million a year with all those toys that you bought and the games and the movies. You were making them rich. And so they were making a lot of money from all those toys, and they were in 30 something countries around the world. So it was a huge cash cow.
Right.
So when they came around to doing Wishbone, they thought lightning would strike twice. And they thought, oh boy, it's a great concept. It's a cute little dog. And so it'll be making $350 million a year. Well, the problem is that their first season, we went out and did 40 episodes in 1 year. Now, in television, you generally do somewhere between 10 to 20 to 23 episodes. 23 is sort of pushing the limit of how many episodes you do in one season. Well, they did 40 the first season. So the expenditure was massive. They spent a lot of money, about 20-something million dollars that first season just on production. And what happened was the show, nobody knew about the show. They hadn't built an audience yet. So when they went to Mattel and some of the toy companies and they said, hey, we want to start turning out, Wishbone plushes and Wishbone games and Wishbone movies and so forth, Mattel said, well, nobody knows who you are. So come back and see us when you have a built up audience. Well, they went broke. They'd put all their money in that first season, couldn't afford to do another season. I think they did one more season, and then they couldn't afford to do it anymore. Wow. So it was really a poor business decision is what killed the show, because it was a cute show. I started on it in the first season, and I did, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Salty Dog, which was about Long John Silver, and he had Treasure Island. So I did a bunch of episodes for them, and had a great time. And it's the thing you were talking about, the real world and the fantasy world. I love doing the fantasy world more than the real world.
Right.
Because the real world, I've done a lot of television. So, I was used to shooting in the real world. And the kids were great. And the sets were great. We built that whole town that you saw with all the houses. And we built that entire complex on a back lot not too far from Dallas. And but then we had a dedicated area where we went in and we built all the fantasy sets. We built the castles and we built the ancient villages and all the really fun stuff.
Right.
And that was a blast. And we'd go over there and we'd shoot muskets and shoot off cannons and we'd blow up things. And I really enjoyed doing that.
You know, with Wishbone, it's like Barney. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite episode because it was so many moments that stood out on that show. You know, I mentioned Robin Hood. That was one I liked. I got that on DVD in my closet, that one. And there was one episode, I think it was The Prince and the Pauper, where they had two dogs. And they switched. Yeah, that was one. And they even did one where he had like a girlfriend. There was a girl dog that came to the house, and he reminisced about the whole season. And it was just something realistic about that show and educational in a lot of ways, you know. And Wishbone will always encourage the kids to go read a book, and a lot of what y'all did was in books.
Yeah, they're always based on a book or a book series of some sort. Yeah, the show, we hired a woman named Jackie Captain to be our dog wrangler, and Jackie had done White Fang for Disney and a bunch of really big, primarily Disney shows with animals. So she was very good,
right?
And so she would handle all the Wishbone to get Wishbone to do the correct looks and the correct directions and all the kind of things that he needed to do. The problem we had is the main dog we had that we used that you saw in most shots was a dog named Soccer.
Right.
And Soccer was scared of his own shadow. He was not a brave dog.
Oh my gosh.
If somebody talked real gruff, you know, like that, Soccer would cow and like this. And then if we shot a gun off, he'd go running for his kennel. So we actually had two other dogs that we used for anytime we wanted the dog to swim or to shoot a gun off or a cannon off. We use those other dogs because they could handle those things. So we use Soccer primarily for all the real close-ups and those kind of things. Can I tell you a funny story?
Sure.
So I was doing Treasure Island, and we built a Spanish galleon on a soundstage, and this thing was huge. So it was almost the size of a real Spanish galleon ship. And so it had an upper deck, and then about 20 feet down, it had a cargo hold. And so one day I was doing a scene in which Wishbone was supposed to start on the top deck, and then he was going to come down some stairs and go into the cargo hold and climb into a barrel filled with apples. That was the scene. So you have to understand.
I remember that. Okay.
Do you remember that?
I remember that. Yeah, that scene? I just thought about it. I remember that.
This is what happened behind the scenes. So we got it set up to do that. And keep in mind, Soccer is the star of a major television show. So he was insured for $1 million. He flew first class. The dog was pampered. His kennel had an air conditioner in it. I mean, I'm talking, Matt, the dog was really pampered. Right. So Jackie was very careful of the dog and was, I mean, anytime we called cut, she would be holding Soccer to make sure nobody stepped on him or anything. So he was very pampered. So anyway, we set up to do the scene. And Jackie and I'm beside the camera down in the cargo hold about 20 feet below the main deck. And Soccer is up on the main deck with Jackie's assistant. And Jackie's assistant is supposed to hang on to Soccer until I call action. And then Jackie's assistant is going to let Soccer go. And Soccer is going to come down the stairs to the cargo hold where we are with the camera and climb in the barrel. So we're all set up. And then while Jackie is preparing Soccer and running him through his paces, I went over to Jackie's assistant and I said, do me a favor, go back and get what we call Dead Dog. And Dead Dog was a stuffed dog that looked just like Soccer that we used for lighting, and we used for anytime we had anything that was dangerous, we would use Dead Dog as the stand-in for Soccer. So I said, go get Dead Dog, don't tell Jackie, and then put Soccer in his kennel. So as soon as we were ready to go and Jackie came down and got with me, the assistant went over and put Soccer in his kennel, got Dead Dog, was up there with Dead Dog. So I say, roll camera. And so he said, we're rolling. I say, we got speed. Okay. All right, Jackie, call action. Jackie says, come on, Soccer. Come on, Soccer. And instead of Soccer, she expected Soccer to come down the stairs. And instead what she saw was this flopping dog flying through the air, legs and arms flopping, and splattered right in front of her. and she thought Spocker had fallen through the hole and
Oh
gotten
my gosh.
killed. And she screamed, and we all started laughing. And she said, "Okay, who did it?" And everybody pointed to me, and
Oh
she
my
chased me
gosh.
around the soundstage.
Well, at least we know you had a good sense of humor.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, if you don't enjoy what you're doing and you're not having fun, you need to be doing something else for a living. So
You're right. Oh my gosh. The last thing I was going to ask you before we go to Barney was if you had any memories of working with I think the voice of Wishbone, Larry.
yeah, Larry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry was great. Yeah, we built him. We called it the doghouse. Anytime, especially in the fantasy scenes were mostly shot outdoors in that special section I told you about that we built the sets.
Right.
And so when we would be shooting out on location, we wanted Larry to be with us. So we built him what we called the doghouse, which looked like, I don't know, kind of imagine a big phone booth, an old fashioned phone booth. And he'd be in there and he could actually then do the voice there on location with us.
Right.
And that way, if I changed the action, if I changed the action or moved something around, then I could go talk to Larry and I could say, hey, I'm going to have Wishbone do this or this. So why don't you add some more dialogue? And so he would improvise a little bit, which he was very good at.
Right.
So yeah, he was great to work with.
Okay, so it was kind of like with Bob West. It was shot in real time, and they was close to the set. He was close to the set.
Yeah, but you do, like any TV show or movie, you do takes. So if you made a mistake, you could go back and you could try to correct it and do another take or anything. The challenge we had with Barney and with Bob, is that Bob and the other voices for BJ and Baby Bop and the later for Riff, those voices were a talent were way back in a different part of the building that we were in. So we were out on a soundstage, but the voices were way back in a whole other place in some sound booths. And we had communication with them so we could talk to them. I could actually talk to them. But their voices were fed out onto the soundstage, and then we had speakers on the soundstage around the action. Right. So when the poor kids that were on the show would be, you can always spot a new kid that when a new kid comes on the show, because they're standing out there next to Barney. So here's let me see if I can. Here's the kid. Okay, here's the kid, and here's Barney. Let me get my hand over. Here's Barney, and here's the poor little kid down here, right? Right. And so the kid's sitting there scared to death that Barney's going to step on him, first of all, because Barney's like 7 feet tall and weighs 350 pounds. Right. And then while the Barney starts talking, it's not coming, his mouth may be moving, but the sound is coming from a speaker way on the other side of the soundstage. And the kid was going, where am I supposed to look? Where am I supposed to say, you're supposed to look at Barney, don't look at the sound at the speaker. Right.
Yeah, it's like Wishbone, Barney was another popular show that blew up big time. I did see Barney once. They did when they did Barney's Musical Castle, it was like a tour. They came to Baltimore once. So I remember seeing him for that and running down to the not to the stage, but to the middle of where the seats were when the confetti fell down to catch a heart. I remember holding on to that because I was a crazy Barney fan. I had the dolls and the tapes and the talking one that was like over $100-some, and my stepdaddy got me, and I played with that for years. I would do this thing where I had like a toy, and whenever I watched the video or the show, I would copy the same dance moves because Knickerbocker Special, like it was all same songs. I would copy off that. Like I was just so hip to that, and I would just it was a good show, which is why I don't get why people didn't understand or like the show. I mean, it was like another kid show. I mean, it was educational. It was everything.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the people that generally made fun of Barney and so forth were generally people that are they're not happy people, and they have. I think it became sort of the thing to do to bash Barney. And so everybody kind of jumped on that bandwagon. And also part of it also is just a misunderstanding of who Barney was in the audience. and the audience was really young kids. So like you were young kids that wanted to have somebody that was fun and was entertaining, but also, you know, for your parents' sake, for your mom's sake, no, you know, he's non-threatening. So he's not going to do anything scary, or he's not going to say he's not going to cuss at you, or he's not going to do any of those kind of things. He's a very safe playmate for your kids.
Right.
And the people that were bashing him were the kind of people that would have done children's show with profanity and you know, and didn't care about the audience that we were focusing on. The age of our audience was actually younger than Sesame Street. So people didn't understand that. And now you have Mattel, which bought the show, and they're now coming out with a new animated version. And I don't know if you've seen the new animated character.
I was going to ask you about that.
I mean, look, if you look at it, Matt, he's a child. So they've made Barney another child. And it's a complete misunderstanding of the fact that Barney is a parental figure, a very friendly, happy, kind parental figure that's trying to help kids weather through the trauma of growing up in this world, because it's, you know, it's a scary world. And when you're a young child and lots of things are happening that are scary, it's nice to have somebody that's safe, who cares about you and loves you and will try to give you helpful advice on doing things. But instead, what Mattel's doing is they're putting another child on the screen with the other children. So who's the helpful parental figure? I mean, it's just a complete misunderstanding of what Barney's all about.
Right. You know, I know for a long time people have been talking about a reboot and how would it, because I know, you know, when they reboot shows, especially from the past, everything is 3D, CGI now, 3D. And it was the question, like, would it go back to the traditional, which I hoped it would do, the suit and the kids, because that's what we grew up on, and that's more realer compared to what they got there. So I mean, it's hard. Well, for me, I don't know what to make about it. I mean, I'll see what happens when it come out, but I like the traditional way, you know.
Yeah, I'm more than willing to give them benefit of the doubt until we see what they come up with. I like you, I certainly hope it's something great that a whole new generation of kids will grow up on and love.
Right.
I have my doubts, but, you know, we'll see what happens. It's, you know, if you look around at all the different sites that are talk about Barney, like your site, and there's so many other sites that love to talk about the show, almost invariably, all those people are saying they wished it had been a live action show again.
Right.
And because that's what everybody grew up on. That's what you know. And there's already plenty of animated shows out there. We don't need another animated show.
Right.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I know. Well, I do have one Barney clip for you. This is an episode you directed, and it's a funny moment with the kids as well as BJ and Baby Bop, and I'm going to pull it up here.
I've always wanted one like this. Yeah, me too.
Hi, Steven. Hi, Keisha.
Sorry about throwing you, Barney.
So, let me get this straight. Steven wishes he had a new bike like Keisha.
Yeah.
And Keisha wishes she could win a ribbon like Jeff did.
I sure do.
And Jeff wishes he could be a safety helper like Kristen.
Uh-huh.
And Kristen wishes she could throw a football like Steven, right?
Right.
Well, I wish we could turn these sad faces into happy faces.
Sissy gets to take it easy all day.
Oh, do not.
Do too. Do too. Well, I wish I could do what she does.
I wish I could do what he does.
Well, when you want something that someone else has...
He's always ready for fun. Yes, PJ is the one.
Oh,
DJ really is pretending to be Baby Bop.
I like my blankie. It's very, very yellow. I like it even better than a bowl of Jell-O.
When she holds you close, it feels just right.
I like my yellow blankie in the day and night.
Now, I didn't remember that episode, but when I came across it last night, I was like, wait a minute. They switched places.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, Yeah, that's actually that set was actually at the studios at Las Colinas. So that's our. It was actually the show started in a small office, but back when the show first started, it was a small office building complex with a very small stage.
Right.
And then we moved to the studios at Las Colinas, which was much more expansive. We actually had that school set that you see there, and that park area was actually on what was called Stage A, which is a very large sound stage, one of the largest. I actually think it is the largest in Texas.
Right.
And then we had 2 other sound stages where we would do green screen shots or other kinds of things. So yeah, it's a and I'll tell you the thing that I laughed about when I was watching your clip is that the throwing Barney across to do the appearance. Because we were always trying to come up with unique and fun ways of having Barney appear. One time I had him appear inside. Did you ever see the episodes we did where we were on a public park and it had like how do I describe it? Like a shed off to one side.
Oh,
the shed.
I seen a little bit of that area.
Yeah. Well, that shed was very small, and I came up with this really dumb idea of having Barney appear inside the shed, but he was so huge when he appeared, it's like the whole thing's moving and back. But we were always trying to come up with really creative ways of having him appear in fun places. So I loved throwing him through the air. That was fun.
Oh my gosh. Did you ever meet or interact with Cheryl Leach and Dennis DeSager?
Yeah. When I first came on, we're all still friends. And Cheryl was with us for, I guess about a season or 2 when I first came on. Because I came on the show, I think in 94 or 95, I think 95. And then Dennis was around for a while, I think for a couple of years after that. But got to work with both of them. Great people, really fun. And, Cheryl just had such a heart for kids and wanting to do something positive in the lives of children. And so she doesn't deserve all the bashing she got from certain people.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've seen the doc that they did last year. I mean,
actually they asked me to be in it and I turned them down. It wasn't because, I think they were trying to do something decent. For television, you have to have some controversy in order to, get people to watch. And so I understood that they were going to present both sides of both camps, the people who loved Barney and the people who hated Barney. And I understood that because it's television and you got to build an audience. Right. But I was a little nervous about whether or not they would be fair. Because I didn't know the people. So that was the one hesitation why I didn't do it. The main reason was this all happened during the COVID thing. And I didn't want to be around people in person during the COVID thing because back in my TV documentary days, I was filming in Guatemala and picked up a strange disease and it damaged my lungs. So I was very scared of COVID. And interesting enough, you'll enjoy this, Matt. And at the end of 2019, I was asked by a company, by a studio in China called the Xingshan Global Studios. And they asked me to come to China and develop a new children's show based on Wishbone and Barney. So I went over there and stayed a month at the studio. And we developed a new show and all that. And this was at the end of 2019. So COVID was already running rampant in China. It's just nobody knew because they weren't telling anybody. Right. I was over there in the middle of all that stuff and never caught it and came back and all of a sudden the whole world fell apart. And then when the documentary came along, I just said, I'm sorry, but it's just not worth the risk.
I understand. Yeah. Steve had asked me when I talked to him if I had seen it. Because he hadn't seen it yet. I've seen it. I got mixed feelings about it. It is what it is.
What did you think? Well, what did you think?
Oh man,
is that an unfair question?
Can I phone a friend like the weakest link?
Please. Yeah. Well, we won't tell anybody.
Sure. Well, well, I'll say this. I like seeing the Barney bashing, and they had Barney being lit on fire and destroying the tapes and the whole garage with the guy who had started the whole thing. Did I really like seeing all that? No. I didn't know about a lot of that. You know, I think my mother, after I watched it, because she didn't tell me that they were haters, and she told me herself once we were somewhere, and there was a parents who didn't like the show when they talked about it, and she told them, like we talked about, it's another kid's show, so you know it is what it is. Did I like seeing all that? No, but what I think what I liked that stood out was the little bit of behind the scenes footage that they used, and the info they talked about when they talked a bit about Charlize, her son, her husband. I didn't know he had passed. And they had 4 of the kids from the early years on. They talked a bit about their background, because a lot of them, when they got off the show, has not gone into acting. A lot of them didn't have social media or continued. So it was great hearing about where they ended up. I think that's the only thing I think that stands out that I liked, but not really about the haters. And they played a clip or two of the same thing with Barney come around the corner and somebody shooting him in some video game. It was, I didn't like it. So
well, and it is true, you know, that during the show we were getting death threats and all those things that they mentioned in the documentary. Those things were going on.
Right.
It was especially for us. I mean, it's okay, you know, as long as it's all just talk. You know, you can just everybody. It's a free country. You can say whatever you want to say.
You're
you know,
right.
but when someone starts stalking you or doing those things, that's a whole different thing. And we ran into that we had a girl on the show named Selena Gomez, who I think, you know, later became famous.
Yeah.
At the time, she was cute as a button, and she was one of my favorite kids on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And she and Demi Lovato were both on the show. And Selena started getting fan mail from this guy that was very inappropriate.
Wow.
And so we had to hire police to be at the studio anytime she was doing an episode. So those kind of things are the dark side of Barney, but it had nothing to do with our goals and what we were trying to achieve. It has everything to do with just there are sick people in this society, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I have to say real quick about that. I had no idea they was on the show. I found out a little later because, you know, I knew them from Disney Channel and other things that they've done as teenagers. So when I found that, I was like, no, they weren't on Barney and Friends. I mean, I remember, because like I said, I grew up during the Wild West years, which is the Bad Guy Gang in the early years. Yeah. I've seen a little bit later on, but not a lot when Carrie and Dean was there. I just happened to be home from school one day. I turned the channel, and I'm like, Barney's voice sounds incredibly different. It don't sound like the same guy, but that was Dean Wynn. So I knew, but I didn't know they had been on. I was like, wow, they was on Barney and Friends. Who knew? You know, and their careers have taken off since then. But wow, I had no idea about that though.
Yeah, when Bob decided to move to Hollywood and leave the show, we auditioned a lot of different people trying to find a voice that was similar. We even talked to Bob at one time about maybe, you know, flying back and forth and everything, but he, you know, he really wanted to move on.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I thought Dean did a good job, and it was different, but it was good.
Right.
And Carrie was great inside the suit. I'll tell you, the things we put him through. You know, I mean, you gotta understand that costume, his vision of the world was like looking through a mail slot. So that's all he could see. But he has this huge body and these huge feet. And so for example, on the scenes that in the later episodes when we were shooting in the park with a big caboose, there were steps down the front of that caboose. And so I had these scenes where I'd have him make his entrance from the caboose and come bounding down those steps. Well, half the time he couldn't see the steps. He was just guessing where they were. And sometimes he guessed wrong, and he'd go crashing into the ground. And inside that costume, actually, when I first came on the show, I told them, I said, I don't want to be asking our guys to be doing things that are unsafe. So I want to put on the costume and just see what it's like. So they put me in the costume, and I'll tell you, inside that thing, there's like this metal frame, and there's all this communication, and it's not an air conditioning, but it's a fan, and there's electronics and all this stuff. So every time he would crash and hit the ground, his head would be bouncing off against all stuff. He'd have to go to the hospital with a concussion.
Oh my gosh.
And the way he manipulated the mouth was what we called a bite bar. He had this
Right.
bar when you've seen it. Okay, when in
Mhm.
his teeth, he went literally doing that to make his huge jaws move.
Right.
Well, poor Kerry, after doing this for years, because he did the road shows, the shows like you saw on the road in Baltimore,
Mhm.
that may have been Kerry, because he was doing those road shows before he came on and did the TV show.
Right.
So he'd been doing it for a decade. And he actually had to have all of his teeth replaced because he'd just worn his teeth out with the bite bar.
Mm.
They paid a heavy price for doing the show.
Yeah, I hear a lot of stories from Kerry. I watch his podcast, and he's had a lot of different guests, including people from the show. And I've seen your episode when you was on there as well. So I can only imagine, because I know I also know well, you probably know him, David Joyner, when he was in the street as well.
David's a great guy. We're still friends. Yeah.
Even David Voss, he was the original one.
Yeah.
Did you know Penny Wilson, the choreographer?
Oh yeah, I worked with Penny for a long time. Yeah, Penny and I were connected at the hip, because when I first came on the show, like I said, they asked me to come over from Wishbone because I had done, as a director, I had directed both what was called film style projects and television style projects, and they're done differently. When you direct a film, you generally use one camera and you shoot everything this direction. Then you put the camera over here and you shoot everything back that direction.
Right.
But in television, you line everybody up like you've seen traditionally, and you put the cameras out in front of them and you shoot it all like live television. Even though it's not live, you shoot it like it's live television.
Right.
But I'd done both. And so they wanted somebody with that experience when they brought me on the show. And when you direct films, like I'd done a lot of films before I did television, and on the shows I did, the director directs everything. You direct the talent, you direct the camera, you tell everybody what to do. And they introduced me to Penny, and they told me Penny was the performance director, which I understood to be the choreographer. And the choreographer just handles the dance moves, because I'm not a trained dance person. So she's supposed to do the dance. Well, the first time I come out on the set, and they introduced me to Penny, and I said, "Oh, looking forward to working with you." Okay, let's get going. So I go out and I start telling my talent what to do. I want you. Here's my blocking. I want you to walk over here and say one line here, and then cross over here and say your other line. So I'm blocking action. Penny comes over to me very quietly and says, "Fred, that's my job." And I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm the performance director. What I didn't know, Matt, was that all the directors prior to me had been television directors. And in television, you have someone like an AD who comes out on the set and directs the talent, and the director stays in his chair and just handles the cameras.
Right.
Well, I'm not that kind of director. I like to be part of the action, get into it, and it also helps because I'm blocking the action for the cameras. Well, they weren't used to shooting that way. And Penny, it hurt Penny's feelings. I said, well, Penny, I said, I understand completely, but this is what I do. And so if I'm going to direct the show, which they want me to direct the show, then this is how we're going to do it. You can do all the choreography, but I'm going to be directing the talent and the cameras. Right. And then she said, fine. And after that, we worked together for, I don't know, I guess 5 years or so before she passed away. And I loved Penny. She was so good with the kids. The kids loved her. And she had a real heart for the show and really believed in the message of the show. And she's greatly missed.
Yeah, I found out maybe 2 years ago that she had passed because I had no idea. It's one of them things that you do when you're researching the show, when you find out people who had passed. And she was one of them. And I was like, wow, I had no idea, because she was on from the very beginning, the choreography for the kids. And I was also, disappointed when we lost Stella. Phyllis, she was, whenever I saw Stella come on, it was always a different traveling story or an episode. And she, from the adults' point of view, she was one of my favorites. So I was really heartbroken when she passed away. Yeah.
I'd actually worked with Phyllis in other TV shows before she came on and did Stella on Barney. So we were friends even before, she came on the show. I'll tell you, she's one of those people, had you met her, you would have been friends in about 2 seconds. She just loved everybody. She loved people, very outgoing, great sense of humor. We had a lot of laughs on Barney because things don't always work like they're supposed to. And
Right.
I don't know if you remember the bag we had that you're supposed to go open the bag and you had magical things inside. And
Mhm.
so one time we were, what was it called? I can't remember the Barney bag. So we had the Barney bag, and it was like this huge bag out on the stage. And she was supposed to open it up and pull this thing out. And I can't remember what it was, but she opens it up, and right, we're rolling camera. She opens it, and it's not in there. And she's like,
Uh-oh.
Fred, there's nothing in here.
Oh
So
my
yeah,
gosh.
she was great. I love Phyllis.
Yeah. Now I have to ask, did you have a favorite Barney song or moment?
You know, the thing about it, you know, it's interesting because you were talking about earlier, but all the songs that are stuck in your head from that era, all of us on the show, we had what was called Video Village, and Video Village was where all the directors and producers would all be in the first AD, first assistant director. We'd all
Right.
be back in this little area where we had monitors. We had multiple monitors covering all the cameras and a bunch of, we had all this sound equipment. Everything was back in this Video Village. So
Right.
we'd all be back there while we're shooting, and they'd be out there doing the dances and singing the songs, and we'd all be back there by the cameras just singing along with them at the same time. So, you know, by the time you do it all day long and, you know, 5 days a week, and you come home at night, you lay in your bed going, if all the raindrops were lemon drops,
Right.
singing the song.
Right.
As far as a favorite one, oh, I don't know. I mean, I have so many that I love just because they're all different, you know.
Right.
I mean, of course, the "I Love You" song is one of those that will always be with me.
Mhm.
But you know, and I loved the Raindrop song. Mr. Knickerbocker, I loved all of them. They were fun.
I think that was my mom's favorite, Mr. Knickerbocker.
Mr. Knickerbocker,
I remember.
it's fun to do. You know,
I remember when we went to see Barney, and they did like this remix where they did from one song, if you happen to know it, to Flipping Mr. Knickerbocker. She was like, all right. So she started getting down because, like me, she loved the show. She loved Baby Bop.
Yeah.
And for me, like you, that's hard to pick. I know back in the day I played Mr. Sun over and over and over again because it was just something about, I love jazz. So when I hear the songs, I think of them instrumentally where it's just the music with no words. So when Mr. Summer come on, I would think of the music. So I remember loving that. And of course, I Love You. And that's, you know, even today as we're, you know, everybody's older and what have you, I think that's a song for adults as well. I Love You. Because there's so much going on today that I think that's a song that it's a kid's song, but I think it's an adult song as well, telling somebody that you love them.
The world would be a better place if we sang it more often.
You're exactly right. Oh my gosh. Well, other than Barney, I was going to ask, do you have like what music do you listen to?
Oh, I like you. I do enjoy jazz, but you know, I grew up in the '60s, and so I'm real retro. I mean, I love a lot of the old '60s music. You know, the Beatles and all these guys. I mean, I still really love those guys. But you know, I love a lot of the new music as well. I mean, there's some great performers out there right now that are doing some really good stuff. And you know, toward the end of Barney's run on PBS, we actually tried to make the music a little more contemporary. So we did some hip hop, and we did some, I wouldn't call it rap, but it was kind of close to rap. And so we tried some different genres, which I think was great. And if we had stayed and kept going longer, I'm sure we would have experimented with a lot of that stuff. You know, it'd been fun.
Yeah, I think that's what somebody described as the character of Riff, and that character I didn't see because that was like years later. But I understand they said that was Riff. He was a dinosaur who was musical in a way.
Yeah, that was the concept. The problem with Riff is, and actually, they actually asked me to direct the episode in which he was introduced to the show. So I directed that episode. And I actually voiced this concern when we went into the original meetings talking about bringing another character on the show. Because the producers wanted a musical character. And I kept saying, but BJ loves music. BJ plays the drums. You know, BJ plays the steel guitar. BJ, you know, he's a musical character. Oh no, we want one that's just dedicated to music. And so since you didn't see him, he has this little kind of a conical sort of head on him as a dino. And he used to have lights. When he originally came on the show, he had lights in them. And so when he would start singing, the lights would pulse in his conical head. The problem is they didn't work half the time. So
Right.
it's like Spielberg with his shark on Jaws. You know, most of the time it just didn't work. So we finally blew off the lights. But we'd try to create episodes in which he would be featured playing instruments or singing a song. And we actually had our musicians writing songs for him that were specifically for Riff. But, you know, it's just, he's one of those characters where, honestly, I didn't think we needed him. I mean, I felt like we already had that possibility. And if they wanted to do more music, which I certainly was for, you could have had BJ do that.
Right.
Because we were constantly doing research, and we would play the episodes in front of kids, bring kids in, play the episodes, and we would watch the kids to see when they seemed bored or when they seemed like they were very caught up in the show. And they were invariably caught up in the show when the music was going.
Right.
So I then wrote and directed an episode called Little Red Rocking Hood. And Little Red Rocking Hood was a playoff on the original story, but instead of she was actually into music. And so I did it like a rock opera in which the whole thing was done with music, and we sang the dialogue, and we did that. And everybody had such a good time doing that. And I think if we had kept going, the show would have transitioned more into doing that, to see how we could incorporate not just, you know, rock, but jazz and other forms of music, other music genres into the show. Wouldn't it have been fun to do a whole episode in which the music was all jazz, and then have it based on jazz, where the kids were studying, you know, learning about jazz? I mean, that would have been fun.
Right. Most definitely.
Yeah. So we need to get the show back.
I'm telling you.
Hey.
You know, it's, you know, I'm trying to find the right words to say. It's like, you know, like I said earlier, I was one of them people that there was just something about Barney that caught my attention. My cousins didn't understand it because they was a little older than me and they loved wrestling and all that stuff. I was not into that. So they didn't get why I loved the show, but it's just something about it. It caught my attention, just like Thomas and Friends. That was another show I was addicted to that I still love. I love trains. So it caught everybody's attention, and it was just a purple dinosaur that cared for children. And every episode, he always would recap the episode, and then it would pop up and go, and remember, I love you. Yeah. And it was warming, you know, and we need that, you know. I mean, I know kids are a little different now because of the cell phones and the tablets, but they can still stream on their tablets and still get hooked into a reboot. You know, I think it could happen. Not like especially now.
Well, especially children at that age, you know, they get up to about the Sesame Street age, and they go through Sesame Street pretty quick because children mature much quicker now, and because of all the media influences that they have. Right. But I think at that really young age, you know, they shouldn't be getting involved in some of those things. They should be watching something that's safe and encouraging, and that's what Barney was. Right.
It was, most definitely. Well, let me see. I got a little something, you know, something to conclude our show. Let me see, because I didn't pull it here. Let me see if I can flip this around.
From me to you, won't you say you love me too? I love you, you love me. We're best friends like friends should be, with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you. Won't you say you love me too?
Great way to conclude it. You know, it's really funny, Matt, but you know, I still see the kids at that age because I'm still friends. Actually, I'm Facebook friends with a lot of those kids, and they're all grown and they have kids that age.
Yeah,
so
I know.
It's not just a wonderful show, but for me, it's a wonderful memory. So thank you for giving me a chance to go down that lane one more time.
Hey, no problem. You know, I thank you for coming aboard, and I thank you as a fan. Thank you for your work and what you've done for the show for many kids, including myself. And thank you.
You're more than welcome.
You brightened my day.
I'm glad it was a positive influence in your life.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will return to you in 1 second.
All right.
Well, guys, thanks for tuning in today. We had a throwback to the Barney world of Barney and Friends. Join me tomorrow, Sunday, at 12. I want to say 12, between 12 and 1, around this time. I'm going to have Andrew Olson on. He was another fan of Barney, and he was on a part of the narration of the documentary, and much more. I have much more to come. So thank you, and peace and blessings. Stay blessed, and take care. Remember, I love you as well.